I'm an old soul. I spent so much time in my younger years surrounded by uncles, aunts, and grandparents. I tell people I was supposed to be born in the 40s or 50s. But even when I was a kid, we had to get up to change the channel on the TV. And we didn't know who was calling us when the phone rang. People even showed up to your house unexpectedly. Well, because they were in the neighborhood. Wherever you grew up, you experienced a childhood that can never be duplicated. Good times, bad times, we struggled, we laughed, we ate, and we cried. I want to go back and hear your story. They say you can't live in the past, but we can hang out there for a while. So I got my man Matty Caputo. All right. I know Matty for a long time. Always been involved in my career, which was really dope. And now I get to see him do great things. I mean, he did a lot of stuff back in the days, was a writer for Maxim. What'd you do? What else?
Yeah,
Slam.
Slam for a couple of years. I was full time over there. Even before that, I had kind of like internship-ish stints at some magazines that hip hop people will remember, like King Magazine and The Source Magazine. I also did kind of like small items for Double XL magazine. I may even have reviewed an album once. I was really interested in stories and people's stories. And I also got interested in stories that just seemed almost like legends, like almost like things that there are elements of them that how could they be true, So
Mm-hmm.
that was my kind of entryway into being a journalist. But back in the day, you started at a weekly paper. There, I think I told you, there was no internet. Not that there was no internet, there was the internet, but it didn't really show you the stories. So I'm kind of glad that a bunch of that stuff is just kind of like lost to time because I would probably not want it out. Not that I did anything wrong, just because it was bad, But
I get it, but that was your come up. That's how you got to where you got. It's like the same thing with music. I might have made songs that I look at now and say, "Wow!"
forget
Like
it.
it's just growing. As a creative. But
Absolutely.
let's go back to Maddie, 10-year-old Maddie. Like, what was Queens? Grew up in Queens. What was Queens like as a kid in your era? You're in elementary school, junior high. What is Queens like?
Well, Queens was an interesting. I mean, it was an interesting place to grow up for me. I grew up on the borderline of. It's funny, right? So the my address I grew up, it was Elmhurst, New York. And if you ever see the movie Coming to America, it's they asked to go to one of the most common parts. You know what I mean? And that's literally where they end up at the McDowell's on Queens Boulevard. That was my childhood Wendy's. And I used to go there with my dad all the time. My dad loved the Wendy's there. My dad was a musician and he ate at all hours of the night. But he swore up until his dying day that Wendy's where the McDowell's was the best Wendy's in the history of America. But we had, I tell people it was, and then like kind of like on the other side. So it's like, if you walk to the corner of my house and you go to the left, you go to Queens Boulevard and Elmhurst and it's the melting pot, right? But then if you go to the right on Grand Avenue. I know you're familiar with Maspeth. Maspeth is a place that I think a lot of us from that area, consider a small town, just like any other small town. I've lived in small towns now in Connecticut and in Westchester, and it's very much that vibe. As a matter of fact, I think it was New York Magazine once said, again, back in the day, 20 years ago or something, that Maspeth was the closest thing to a small town New York City has. And I
Wow.
think and I think that there's a lot of truth to that if you know the area. So I grew up kind of like in those two communities, and I was able to see kind of like the old school um way of New York. And then in Elmhurst, I was able to really communicate uh, really with a lot of people with different backgrounds, different religious beliefs, different ethnicities. And I was always comfortable in both areas. I always called my friends, I was always, our friend group was always like the multicultural mafia. It was just like, we had Dominican friends, Irish, Greek, Korean, everybody in our friend group. So
Well, you got the best of both worlds, basically,
I
because,
did.
well, when you have that, and I had the same way growing up in Yonkers, I had, it was like the United Nations, we used to say, because you had friends from everywhere. But as you got older, when you started venturing into college or into the workplace, you were already you're already cool with all the cultures. So nothing was a shock. Where some kids that grew up in one place, they go somewhere and they're like, I don't even know how to adapt. So I think we had it that way where we were able to adapt. We already had it as kids. So it helped
Yeah.
us as we got older.
And I was really fortunate because my dad is dead, but my dad was a jazz musician, and I wouldn't say he was a famous guy, but he was known around New York. His name would come up on WBGO once in a while and stuff like that. But I had a really New York City, going around with my dad a lot. New York City seemed like a really small place. Like, I'll never forget one time I was in the old St. Mark's bookstore, the famous St. Mark's Books,
Yep, I remember
which
that.
which was right there by NYU and the Continental, right there by St. Mark's Place. And I remember being online with my dad, and there was a dude in front of us, and he left his debit card at the counter. And I run out and I go after him. And it was Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. He was the lead, the main guy behind the band Sonic Youth. So it's just like New York City, you're waiting online, and like here's this like basically rock legend kind of like on the line in front of you, and you're running to bring him. And I traveled. I got to travel around a lot and meet different people with him. My dad played just like random encounters with people.
I've seen. I went to one of his shows in Manhattan before.
Yeah,
I met your dad, class act, well known, well
yeah. He's well
respected,
known.
well respected. And he's very humble. But his resume speaks for itself. But yeah, it must have been cool to have a dad that was, known in the circles, or just, watching people probably come up to your dad. You probably were like, wow, like, here's my dad, but he's well known and people have love for his music.
Well, you know what, man? I'll be honest with you. I really had a unique experience with that because I got to tag along um, with him with different things. Like, first of all, he used to work with this one older gentleman who's now passed away, and he worked with a few guys like this that kind of uh, they had money and they wanted to keep the sound of the big band alive. So the big band music of the 40s and the 50s, the Harry James and the Tommy Dorseys and the Glenn Miller orchestra type music from that era. My dad always was involved with that. Wasn't his main thing, but he was always, in some way involved with like an older guy who had money who wanted to keep that sound alive. I even met Donald Trump through my dad one time. That was, believe it or not, I met Donald Trump at the Broadway Cares. It was an AIDS benefit for Broadway, and my dad was actually subbing in the pit band. And Marla Maples was the star of the show. Her and Martin Short.
Martin Short, wow.
So they were all kind of like in the lobby of this while my mother and I and my brother were waiting for my dad to walk out. So
Wow.
it was pretty crazy. That was about 1990 or 91.
Okay. Well, that's the era. That's the era that I was just getting into. What did you want to be? Say 10 years old. Did you already know what you wanted to do, or you were just kind of one of these? Did it take you a certain time to know what you wanted to be or get into?
It's so funny because this is one of those questions that they ask you now on the dating apps. It's like there are these pre-prescribed questions, and it's like, oh, ask him what he wanted to be when he grew up or whatever. I actually got asked this question recently, in between the last time that you and I spoke. I, believe it or not, I wanted to be a private investigator from like the youngest
But that
ages.
makes sense because
Hmm.
stories, and you a writer. I get it.
I was obsessed with Encyclopedia Brown, who was like a kid detective from television. There were books, you know what I mean, the Encyclopedia Brown books. And then there was, believe it or not, one of my first jobs immediately out of high school, like I think I started the week after I graduated high school, was back in the day. This is 2002. To work with a friend of my brother's, this kid Sean Walsh. Shout out to Sean Walsh, who's been a great friend over all these years. Still keeps in touch with me and helps us out with some stuff, with the Mustache Classic. But we had to drive around, we had to drive around all of Queens, Westchester, Northern Westchester. I think we even went up to Putnam a few times. We had to go to Staten Island, Yonkers, and what we would do was we would go. We were hired by another friend of my brother and this kid Sean, their father, to work for this company called Armor Security Systems. And what we would do was, I, who was underage, would go in the supermarket and try and buy beer. And if they sold it to me, we had to get the people who worked
Yo,
there.
this is classic.
We had to get the people who worked there in trouble. Like we like had to like tell them,
Basically,
well,
something that could never happen now.
right, right.
Yeah. So
You know,
so let me ask you, what were like holidays like at your house? Did you host? Do you go out with family? I mean, how was your mom and dad like, holiday time?
it's funny you say that because my mom was just talking about it basically yesterday because I'm here in Connecticut. Uh, I'm finishing up a book and I just finished up a master's. And I think she said we started hosting at our house like the year they got married, which was 1976. And by that point, really, other than my mom's sister, I'm sure at that time nobody else in the family, nobody in the immediate family had a house. My grandmother on my mom's side, she lived in an apartment above, in a building that our family had owned. And then my father's mother lived in an apartment above an old pizzeria in New York, San Marco Pizza in Williamsburg. She lived there. Her and my aunt lived there almost 60 years. So, um, our house, especially when me and my brother came around, my brother was born in 80, I was born in 84. Yeah, certainly things got more centered around our house. We have like it's really a three-story house. There's a basement, there's a street level, and then there's a top floor. And even the basement, you walk out the street level, out the back door of that house. So you could come and go as you please. There was more room to stretch out. My mom was a very, very, very festive person. She didn't, uh,
I mean, most were back in the days. They
right.
took pride in it. Where now everybody's kind of like spread out. But
My
back then it
mom,
was, even if you didn't have money back then, it
oh,
didn't
right.
matter. It was just, we're gonna have everybody here and we're gonna do it as big as we can. And that's how it was.
My mom, she was big into, I don't know if you, well, it's called Christmas in the City. It's those little houses that light up
Yeah.
with the light. My mom was big into that, and she had, we have like this three-story, three-level shelf that she used to make a different scene on every level. And I mean, it's crazy. She's 76 years old, and at our house in Queens, she was like, I don't think I'm gonna put, I don't think I'm gonna put ornaments up this year. The lights are just enough. I was like, all right, ma, all right, whatever.
Yeah, whatever works, right?
And then I was with her the other day, and by the time I had my coffee, she had all the ornaments on the tree. So it just
They
goes
only
to
know
show,
one speed,
they
that
only know
era.
one
They
speed.
they
They
don't
only
they
know one
can't
speed.
slow down. It's just what they know. Does your mom still cook?
That's one area that she has kind of slowed
Yeah.
down on.
Yeah, it's that happens though.
But she's alone a lot. I only go down about once a week with. I do teach a little bit, so between the teaching and other things I work on, a lot of writing. I only really get down there about once a week. So, but she was great at that stuff. My mom
Favorite dish, your mom. What was your favorite dish?
pasta fazool really
Oh,
good. Escarole and beans we had the other night, just very
classics.
simple. She's really good with like the peasants food. She's Sicilian, so it's
Those
like
are the best.
a lot of bean based things, stuff like that. But my mom was of a it's so crazy. I think about it all the time. Like, I had a tough 2 years, the last 2 years, just kind of, really, really trying to grind to do something with writing again and doing a master's. Really in the last 3 or 4 years, I lost a lot of family. I lost, closest aunt, closest uncle. I lost my father, all since I started a master's, and that's a short time. But, what's so crazy is I always felt like, the anxiety of all that I needed to slow down at times and rest. It's so crazy. Like, I don't know how my mother did it. My mother had worked 41 years in St. John's Hospital. She had 2 children. She had a miscarriage. She had a mother that had a stroke and a husband that had a heart attack and then a bypass. Never needed a sabbatical, didn't need extra time off, didn't need, and that, I don't know if that was to her benefit or to her detriment, but she's certainly a resilient person. It's kind of old school mentality.
They were raised different. It was a different time, different feel. And we all have stories like that we can, and I can resonate with it. I understand it. I look back and things that you went through as a kid, you don't realize what went on until you're older. And you look back and say, "Oh, how did they do this? Or how did this?"
100%.
You start appreciating as you get older, and especially me, I have a daughter, and I'm like, how did my mom do it by herself? It was just me and her. Like, it's hard to do it with when you have two, but she just had one. So I start thinking of those things as well. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you know what I mean? You don't appreciate it until, you appreciate it as you're younger, but you just don't see what you see until you're older, So, and everybody has that. I know you were talking about your uncle, Lenny, right? Wasn't that your uncle?
Yeah, that was my uncle.
Now, I never met him, but I always, through your stories or through, the internet, whatever, I could tell the love and the respect you had
Yeah.
for him. I mean,
Yeah.
he seemed like, the bond you guys had was phenomenal,
Yeah, he was like my grandfather in a lot of ways. He's like my mom's cousin. So I didn't have grandfathers on either side. They both unfortunately died, both very young and many, many years before I was born, in both cases. But I did have like a string of uncles, and my mom's sister's husband was my Uncle Joe, and he was like this very serious man who did a lot of reading and barbecuing. And then I had my my uncle Michael, the pharmacist. All of our even mutual friends of ours, they know exactly who I'm talking about when I say Uncle Michael, the pharmacist. So as Uncle Michael, the pharmacist, he was like just a very kind of deeply religious man, hardworking, good businessman, he's a successful man who really took a liking to me. And then I had Uncle Lenny, who was just absolutely nuts. I mean, like he had stories for days. I mean, when I lived on the same block as him in Brooklyn, I would catch him talking to girls like that were not even half his age, a quarter of his age. He had a lot of crazy stories, and yeah, you start to miss those people who are such larger than life characters in your mind. There's I'm sure you've seen it, but there's a movie called Radio Days by Woody Allen, and it's a family story where there's a kind of generational bond between the people through the radio, and the main character, um uh you know the redheaded kid from Austin Powers, what's his name?
Oh, can't think, but I
it,
know who he's talking about. Yeah.
it was one of his first movies. He was a kid. Anyway, it's kind of, it follows this generation, and um, the metaphor at the end is so real because it's just so poignant, and it's basically that you know you never forget those voices, but with every year that passes, they become a little less in your recollection, a little more faint in your recollection. And that's what, unfortunately, that's what started to happen. Not necessarily with these relatives, but kind of like the group before that.
It's so real. I can understand that. And I lost my mom and my uncle, who's like my dad, all, in pretty much of a close time, even going back to my dad. And then, all the people that, it's just part of your family. When you lose that, like, direct line of people that raised you, it's tough. And then you might hear a song, or you might go through a certain time or see something on TV, and automatically you think of them. You know what I'm saying? And that it's the beauty of it, but then you can be sad and happy at the same time because that brings you to a certain place.
And to just for accountability and accuracy's sake, the line from the end of Radio Days is, "And I've never forgotten any of those people or any of the voices we used to hear on the radio. Although the truth is, with the passing of each New Year's Eve, those voices seem to grow dimmer and dimmer." And that's really a very poignant thing I think when it comes,
Deep.
outside of Woody Allen's, history or whatever, I think that's a very poignant thing about family. When you grow up in a family and everybody is a character. My Uncle Lenny was a character. I mean, all of my friends knew him. They wanted I used to bring him to parties at my little apartment in Brooklyn, and like all of the girls I worked with wanted pictures with him, and it was just, he was a larger than life, very
Yeah,
funny
he's like a
guy.
local celebrity. One of those guys.
Exactly.
And you don't find them anymore. And I'm an old soul. Like my nana, my papa, I was with them as a kid. My mom worked, so after school, I was with them all the time. So you become that old soul, which never leaves you. You know what I mean? And
what happens is,
you miss those old times. I don't have any old timers left in
right.
family. So you miss those family, those holidays, and everybody's around, everybody's laughing. It was a different time, man.
Legends are people in the neighborhood who are dead, who their story is only captured by word of mouth.
Well, the stories that we remember, but back also too, we had neighborhoods. Like now, a lot of the neighborhoods are not the neighborhoods anymore. You didn't. It's a different time. Things have changed from what we knew. So it's hard to even go back and try to recreate anything. It's almost like it is what it is. Like your Uncle Lenny, there's no more Uncle Lenny. They don't make those anymore. You know what I mean?
Quite,
like,
yeah.
Not quite. I'm just saying that that generation, even your mom, and like the way they act and the way they move and the way they do things, it's a different time. And that's why, it's like this show. It's like, you can't live in the past, but you can hang out for a while. And that's the beauty of it, right? Because people do get stuck in the past and they want everything to be the way it was. It's not. You have to adapt to what it is now, but there's nothing wrong with remembering those times and those people.
I did a story about the Jerky Boys. He was talking about stuff from the 90s.
I remember that.
He's talking about stuff from the 90s. I mean, the truth was, nobody had ever actually tried to verify what actually happened to the Jerky Boys. But I mean, when I say what happened to them, I mean how they even became famous in the first place. Nobody had ever really, and I don't know if you know, but it got very deep and personal for me because there's a couple of reasons. First reason was they shot the movie on my block in 1995. Right. That you remember where I lived on 79th, yeah. And they shot that movie on the block, and we were in the middle of it all. And Kamal Ahmed remembered me 100%. And then, like, I don't know if you know, but Cody, a mutual friend, Cody, he used to live in the house where he didn't live there. I'm sorry. Cody used to go out with a girl who lived in the same house as the Jerky Boys did when they were making those prank phone calls.
I never knew that.
House. Yes. He used to go out with the landlord's daughter. And or if it wasn't the landlord's daughter, it was another family who rented in the same house. He went out with the girl that lived there. And it just got very, I think that's one of the things that has made, you know, journalism worth it for me is there's those weird connections that you make, and ultimately, there's a story or, something that comes out of it.
Very true. So, knowing what you know now, what would you tell a 16-year-old Matt?
You know, um 16's almost kind of too late. Like it sounds crazy. I probably needed to do better in school starting a little earlier than 16. I didn't, I wasn't the best student just in the sense that I was really self-educated. What I wanted to learn about, I would learn everything about. My dad took me to the city every weekend. We would go to St. Mark's Books, Norm Sound and Vision, Shakespeare and Company, and I would educate myself. But I probably wasn't a great student, and I think that it's the old cliche, if you just only done better in school at times. And I think the biggest thing is that you have to be patient, 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 patient. I was really fortunate that I watched my dad work as hard as he did to hold on to whatever piece of the music business he lived and died with, because I just don't think I would have realized how hard it was to be successful. My dad practiced constantly. He was constantly trying to book gigs. He was constantly trying to build relationships, do gestures of goodwill to other musicians in order to solidify those relationships. He loved everybody in that community. And you know what? I've made a ton of mistakes, and there's things even as an adult I have to get better at. But, I think my heart's always been in the right place. I honestly think a positive attitude is like one of the most, it's like the best tool you could have in life is having a positive attitude. I think that there were times where I didn't have the best attitude, and that hurt me. You know what I mean? But I am lucky that I did salvage things. You know what I mean? I did kind of realize that, you have to just kind of, sometimes you have to get in where you fit in. MC Shan told me that once a long time ago. He told me, he's like, when you're going to be successful, it's not like you just choose. You get in where you fit in. You get in where you fit in. And sometimes I needed to do a better job of trying to fit in where I was than climbing the next step.
Good stuff. Great. I mean, priceless gems you learned from your dad, young, which took you as,
Yeah.
you took it with you forever. You can't, those things can't be taught by any, having your dad as a musician is just like, come on, like just to have that is amazing. All right, I have a good one right here for you. 3 dinner guests.
Oh, there's a great writer. He's a biographer of Jerry Lee Lewis and Dean Martin and Sonny Liston. His name was Nick Tosches, and I think I would like to invite him to dinner. I think you have to go with dead people, right? Because you know, um, this is always a tough one for me because I hate to say it, I always find a reason like
What to
not to
go?
like, yeah, like not to like some celebrity or not to feel like they're 100% on the level. I hate to say that, but it's true. Um, mm, can't invite another writer.
It could be even in any form of anything. It can be a friend. It could be any 3 people at
I'd
any point.
love I'd want somebody that would have an interesting conversation. I don't know if you know the Johnny Depp movie from the 90s, Ed Wood. Maybe I would invite Ed Wood to dinner. He's just like the most eccentric director. He was like or maybe Bela Lugosi. I recently got a graphic novel about Bela Lugosi's life, and he was a very interesting guy. He played Dracula, right? So, and he and Ed Wood were interlocked. So I think that would be interesting. Ed Wood, Bela Lugosi, and Nick Tosches at the dinner table. That would
Wow.
be hammered. Just like,
I mean,
weirdest crew.
That's unbelievable right there.
Weirdest crew of people probably ever. No one's gonna come out with that. And
No.
I didn't mention an athlete.
I'm surprised at that.
Maybe
Sonny like
Liston.
You said, it's maybe Sonny Liston. That's wow.
That'd be a good one.
All right, we're gonna end it off. One word. This is a little fun piece. One word. So I'm gonna say a few names, and you just spit out a word for me. All right, Mom.
Strong.
Dad.
Artist.
Brother.
Coach.
The Mets.
Heartbreak.
Queens.
To infinity.
Genovese.
Uncle.
Matt Caputo.
Resilient.
That's good, brother. Love it. Hey, listen.
Great talking to you, man.
Yeah, listen. This was great.
Man. This was
I
awesome.
appreciate it. Definitely have you back soon. But also, once again, I got to congratulate you. I'm proud of you.
Thank you,
Professor
man.
Caputo.
Yes.
I never would have thought that. I always knew you were talented.
Never would have either.
I always knew you were talented as a writer. I always knew that. But it's a great thing. I love to see you grow, and definitely, can't wait to hear more stuff.
No, it's been
from your career.
It's been a good thing, and it's one of those things. It's just another thing you have to kind of learn and get better at. So it's one day at a time.
We're never too old to grow.
Yep.
All right, brother. Appreciate you.
Be good, man.
Talk soon. They say you can't live in the past, but we can hang out there for a while.